I think we should start it off by just introducing our panelists. So, and you guys are both accomplished, so let's keep it brief.
My background is way back in the day. I studied computer science at MIT. We had two companies prior to this, one that was called Ksplice that did software updates without rebooting that Oracle acquired, and then one that was called Zulip that Dropbox acquired before starting this thing.
What's up? My name's Justin. I'm the founder of Atrium. Started a lot of companies. The one that worked out, well, most of them failed. One worked well, and it was called Twitch. And then I was a partner of Combinator for a couple of years advising early stage companies. And then selective memory kicked in, and I decided to start another company. So I'm in the struggle with all of you now again, and that company's Atrium. So excited to be here. Thanks for coming.
Okay, so raising a Series A is a really important milestone for startups, but it's definitely not the easiest round to secure. Can you guys explain the concept of a Series A crunch and why it's so difficult to raise that round of capital?
Go for it.
All right. So I think what happens in Silicon Valley is oftentimes founders find it pretty difficult to raise a Series A, and that's kind of because of a bunch of things. In the market, what you've seen in the past 10 to 15 years is this shift towards these larger and larger seed rounds to get going. So many of you have probably raised a seed round. When I was starting off, when we raised our very first venture round for Justin TV in 2007, we raised a Series A, and our seed round was like $300,000, and our Series A was $2 million. And we thought the $2 million was like a pretty big number at the time. But now you see seed rounds that are like multiple millions of dollars, and they're raised from all sorts of different people who do very little diligence. So like angel investors, people who have been founders, maybe seed funds, but they're all often done on these safes or convertible notes really quickly as these massive party rounds where people are investing maybe a couple $100,000 into a multi-million-dollar round. And so they're not really doing that much diligence. The bar to get that money from them is not that high. Maybe you have a really great idea, you have a great product demo, you have some early traction, you have a great team, and then you aggregate, a 1, 2, or 3, or even larger million-dollar seed round. And so oftentimes people, this happened for me actually with one of my companies. It goes to your head, you're like, that was super easy. I got this couple $1 million. And then you think the next round's gonna be that easy, and then 12 to 24 months goes by. You've spent a lot of that money on maybe getting a little bit more product traction, building out your team, and then you go out to raise money and you're completely unprepared for like the amount of diligence and expectations and kind of threshold milestones that a professional venture capitalist is going to expect. And I think that's kind of that's when the crunch happens.
Yeah, the other thing I think contributes to it is like to raise the seed, it's a narrative about how great you are, how great the vision is. Like you're really selling the dream. Whereas I think, especially depending on the industry, when it's time to raise the Series A, it can be much, much more metrics focused. The rubber has finally met the road. Your investor is going to look at, well, what traction have you actually achieved? Like, what did you actually do? Which is, it's basically harder to fake, right? There's some real stuff that gets checked out. Whereas for the seed, it's about how compelling is the team, how compelling is the vision.
Okay, so let's do some storytelling. Travel back in time to your very first company. What was the process of fundraising like? And it can be seed or Series A, but did you have contacts, and how did you go about choosing who to reach out to?
For our first company, we did this in Boston. It was totally bootstrapped. We didn't raise any money at all. I think what we did is actually we applied for like an NSF grant. It was like it was government grant. You filled out this like massive 60-page application. Then like 9 months later, you hear that you get it, and then you have to like keep time cards. The whole thing is, from a bookkeeping perspective, very painful. But for that company, for us, it was like we were all like 21, 22. We were just out of school. I think we just did not know anything about anything, especially when it came to fundraising. And this was like 2008, where you didn't really have like the robust networks of information on the internet. Like there wasn't Hacker News, YC wasn't really a thing. Like there was no one really there to advise you. So I think we had some like bumbling conversations with some Boston VC investors, and because it was 2008, they were like, normally we would like slow know this, we would just kind of like slow play you, but because like of the financial crisis, we're just gonna tell you now.
There's like no way we ever wanted this.
Right, it's just like, we're gonna close that door right now. I was like, okay, fine.
What about the next time?
The next time it was, well, for us it was very nice because it was like, look, we have this track record of this first company, Oracle had acquired it, the team had started to build some cred. So for the second company, raising the seed round was a much more straightforward process where we just called up contacts we had made in the previous companies and we're like, hey, we got the band back together, we're doing this other thing, do you want to put in some money? And it was kind of, as you said, it's like very minimal diligence, like here's the check. So.
For us, for Justin, well, I had a company before that was really shitty, and we raised $70,000, so it doesn't even really count. But that process was basically like begging some of Paul Graham's rich friends. He's the founder of Y Combinator, so he did this demo day. It was in the very first YC batch, and then he cajoled maybe 10 of his friends to show up, and so it was really just badgering them for $70,000, which lasted a whole year, actually. And then, we failed, ended up selling that company on eBay. It's kind of an irrelevant story. But we ended up, for the next company, we actually raised a lot over successive rounds. So we raised that $300,000 seed round, which was mostly hitting up random angel investors and, once again, repeating that kind of begging process. But this time, we had like maybe it was more narrative based. The narrative was completely bad. I mean, the idea behind the company was not a good one. It was us trying to make our own reality TV show on the internet, which is a bad business for like a bunch of reasons, but I guess it doesn't really matter. We convinced these guys to give us like a couple $100,000, and then we ended up raising $2 million from this mediocre firm. Maybe I don't want to say that. A great firm who supported us, an amazing firm, because they support us. Actually, I think they've done quite well from a returns perspective now. But this firm called, and now I've really painted myself in a corner.
Yeah, that's your you just switch topics.
Yeah, so we raised money from this firm, this small firm, that raised $2 million back in 2007, and then we ended up raising another 3.9 million kind of Series B. These are all like much smaller numbers at the time, about a year later. And then over the life cycle of the company raised it was like 45 million total. So whatever 45 million minus 6.2 million is, 38.8 million. And that was kind of the fundraising history for Justin TV. Eventually became Twitch, and then that's what we did. I forgot what the original question was now.
It's fine. We'll move on to the next question.
Yeah.
So you guys make it sound like it was a fairly positive and easy experience to raise capital, but I'm sure that there were days where it was a big struggle. Can you maybe elaborate on what the biggest challenges were and those days when you wanted to give up?
Yeah, actually it wasn't, it sounds easy in retrospect when I relate it in 30 seconds, but it really wasn't very easy. So when we felt for the first, actually the entire lifetime of Twitch, we felt like it was basically begging. When we got the seed round, that was a little easier. Because it was easier in the sense that it was just like rich people being like, that's a cool idea, all right. And because Paul had invested as like part of Y Combinator, that was kind of like this little, it wasn't very popular back then, but it was a little bit of a stamp for this very small community of people who were his friends. And then when we raised the Series A, that was probably like the easiest it ever was. This $2 million Series A, we ended up, because we launched this thing and it was kind of a weird phenomenon of like, Justin's gonna do a live streaming reality show, and it was all over the news. People thought that meant it was getting used and watched, which is not usually, they don't correlate really one-to-one. And so there was like all this hype around it, so people were at least willing to talk to us. So we went up and down Sand Hill Road and talked to all these investors, and we're telling them about our business, which was effectively like, we're gonna make a reality TV show. And they were, the nice ones were like, that's a hits-based business, which meant, you have to like make a hit, right? It's kind of like almost like making a hit game or movie or something. And they were like, we don't invest in that kind of business. And then most of them just completely ghosted. But we did get two people who were pretty interested, and one of them ended up saying, okay, they didn't give us a term sheet, but they gave us this verbal offer, and they were like, we'll give you, we'd love to invest like $1 million at a $5 million valuation. And so then there was this other firm that we ended up raising from, and I remember we lived in our apartment which was also our office, which was a really crappy apartment. And we had these whiteboards on the wall that were actually not even real whiteboards, but they were the whiteboards that you buy at like Home Depot that are like shower board that kind of serves as whiteboard, but it's cheaper. and doesn't really erase properly. And so we wrote on the wall like the 1 million at $5 million valuation as like a, an option. We were kind of like mapping out our options. And then I remember we met with this other investor, and we met in our office, and we walked them past that on the way out, accidentally, actually. And then they were interested, and they came back actually with like 2 million at a $10 million valuation. And so we ended up just taking that. And that was like the easiest it ever was. Every round after that was a series of like, we did it completely wrong. The main thing we did wrong, there were two things we did really badly. One was we were horrible at telling a narrative of what our company was. And the second thing that was really bad was we ran the entire process linearly instead of in parallel. And so it was basically going to one person being like, hey, will you give us money? And they'd be like, no, or more than likely they'd ghost. And then we'd go to the next guy and be like, give us money. And they'd be like, repeat the process over and over again. So the second time for our Series B, which was the 3.9 million, we ended up talking to like everyone, and we ended up having to go back to our existing investors who gave us another 3 million, and then we got like $900,000 from Tim Draper after his firm told us no. So he was like, I like them personally, so I'll give them something, but my firm thinks they're horrible, so they were not actually going to make an investment. And then after that, we did this who did we raise money from? We did another round of begging for and got told no by almost everyone, and raised money from Bessemer. And they were like, it was like a non-competitive round. It was just like one investor, and the valuation on that round was like an order of magnitude or two lower than other websites that had comparable traffic, right? We were just like so bad at doing this. And then we raised another round that was led by Thrive, and they only put in $5 million of a $20 million round because they were so not convinced. Once again, it was like much suppressed valuation-wise compared to like comps. And so the whole thing was like horrible, actually. And we learned a lot, but it was like not easy.
I think for us, because our history was a little bit weird on it too, with the first company, again, we really did bootstrap it. So the whole way we operated the company was you can't spend money that you didn't make selling your product, which I think forced a certain amount of like healthy discipline. But again, we're like 22 or whatever, and we don't know anything about how to run a company. And I think we just felt like, oh, we should really be raising money because like that's what real companies do, and like we want to be a real company. So we spent a lot of time. It was like completely unprincipled. I think we didn't really understand like why we should do it or even what we were going to do with the money. We just kind of felt that like we need to be talking to investors, which like that's actually not a good strategy. We spent a lot of time talking to this firm called In-Q-Tel, which is like the VC arm of the CIA, basically. And it was like the coolest meetings because they would take you to these like nondescript hotel rooms, and then they would like show you their credentials. And like I don't know how to evaluate if this is a real CIA badge or not. Like, okay. And we just spent a bunch of time talking to them, but I think like because we were not in the driver's seat and we didn't really know like how much we wanted or what terms we wanted on or what we wanted to do with it, like the conversations were just like very, very unstructured. And so that wasn't like disheartening, but it was just sort of frustrating because it was like a lot of wasted time. I think the experience that was more like trying or emotionally difficult for me was actually with the second company. So again, we had that first company, Ksplice, that Oracle acquired. We were at Oracle for a year to transition over to tech. And then the founders all left together and started another company. We kind of got the band back together. The seed round was quite straightforward. As I mentioned, we just kind of like reached out to people on our network. We're like, we're doing this new company. Do you want to invest? And it was kind of what you're saying. It's just like, they'll just write you a check. And I think because of the success with the seed round, we're like, oh, we're doing so well. This company is amazing. Like, we're going to have no trouble raising a Series A. And so we went and we had like a pretty aggressive ask. And I think we ran the process pretty well. We identified like 5 or so firms we liked, and we gave them the pitch, and we showed them the initial traction. And like the narrative was reasonably tight. And I think we were trying to raise, I want to say there was like $6 million or something. And this was, I guess, like 2012 or something. And no one was really biting. And we were like, I don't understand. Like, I thought we had like this awesome team. Like, look at this traction. Like, why doesn't anyone invest in our company? And then one firm came back to us and they're like, look, we like you, we think you're onto something interesting, but like, we want to see more traction. Like, we want you to do more before we're willing to give you that scale of money. We would give you $2 million, which, like, look, that's a good problem to have. Like, someone was willing to give us money, but emotionally, we were so sure we were gonna like get this deal on this terms that we wanted, and we're like, what do we do? How are we gonna tell the team about this? Like, should we take it? Should we not? Like, ultimately, the story resolved to everyone's satisfaction because Dropbox acquired the company, which was like awesome for the team and a great outcome for everyone. But that, I think there was a lot of existential angst for us about like, is this an offer we should take? It felt like it was not success, and were we just gonna like be realists and accept it, or like what the plan was gonna be there?
So in 2018, things are a lot different from when you guys started your first businesses, and a lot of that has to do with SoftBank. So nowadays, Series A investments and seed investments are larger than what they once were. So I'm curious to you, what is a Series A? What does that deal look like? And can you raise too much money at that stage?
I mean, it is crazy that the numbers now that are seed rounds used to be what you would call a Series A. It's like if you look at Dropbox's Series A and 2008 or whenever it was, it's like that is the size and at a valuation of a seed round today. So definitely everything has kind of shifted up. I think when you think about how much money to raise, like you can be somewhat principled about it. At every fundraise, you're raising money to get to another milestone, and the milestone is either being profitable or the ability to raise even more money. So I think the way to do that is to back solve from like, okay, I'm raising my seed. What is it going to take to successfully raise an A? What is required from a metrics perspective? What is required from a traction perspective? What does that imply about how I'm going to grow the team? How long it's going to take? How much money I need? And I think being thoughtful about the right amount of money does matter. I mean, better to have too much than too little, but that's sort of how I think about amount raised.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. You want to have a plan. You should have a credit. Like, I think a lot of people just make up a number because that's what they see other people doing, but you should have a plan that should be based on some sort of operating plan to get to that milestone. And if only for yourself. In fact, investors often don't even ask to see it, or it's kind of like a checkbox after the fact, after they've decided that they're interested in you or not. Well, or after they decide they're interested in you, but it's good for you to have that plan for yourself. And then, you can add some buffer.
What does a Series A ready company look like, and how much does that differ across industries?
I mean, the thing that people say in B2B SaaS is like $1 million ARR. I don't know that that is really a hard and fast rule. It definitely is a rule that if you talk to VCs, they'll talk about. I think there's sort of like the calculus is a little bit more complicated where it's like, okay, there's some like premium you're getting because of the caliber of the team, and there's some premium you're getting because of like the traction you've gained, and like depending on how big this column is, this column doesn't have to be quite as big. Like for us, we raised a Series A before we got to $1 million ARR, and I think the reason we were able to do it with this company is like our investors were like, wow, this team is exceptional. Like we believe they can get there. We will like give them credit. We'll basically like play for the trajectory of the company and invest as though they were there. Whereas I think if the team were more unknown or whatever, I think investors will look instead at, well, what has the company actually achieved? That's what I would say on B2B SaaS, which is my main area of expertise.
Yeah, I think it's really highly dependent. There's no formula. They don't plug you into a formula. It's really more about finding some partner that's going to fall in love with your company, and you're really just setting up a process where you think that after you talk to a certain number of people in the top of the funnel, you're going to end up with like one or more people in love with you. And so, lots of factors go into that, as Waseem said. I definitely think it's mostly at the Series A stage, and then even in later subsequent rounds, about the narrative of like that you're pitching. I used to think that the narrative was for the seed round, but I actually think it's the primary driver of every round up until even hundreds of millions of dollars or potentially more than that in funds raised. And so like really making sure that you have a tight story for why this is a big problem that you're attacking, why you have found the solution to the problem, and how that solution is like kind of impacting the world, I think is the most important thing, kind of the most fundamentally important thing.
very agreed on the narrative. I think it's easy to think about VC as this like kind of black box or machine that like takes in companies as input and like puts out money. Like there are people like us that have emotions and respond to stories, and I think the power of a well-crafted narrative like does land and does matter. So I think that's exactly right.
So most first-time founders don't have their pick at VC firms. Some may, but if you do have your pick at multiple firms, what characteristics are you looking for in the right partner?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not about the firm, it's about the partner. I think that's exactly right, which is you're gonna be spending a lot of time with this person. And so like the basic litmus test for me is like, is there chemistry there? Do you trust them? Do you think they have your back? Are they excited about your business? It's like, do you wanna spend time with this person? Because ultimately you're gonna spend a lot of time with this person. So if you don't like them, you probably shouldn't take their money.
Yeah, it's somebody you can't fire, right? So these people write a big check, they get a board seat, it's very hard to get rid of them. So it should be someone that you actually want to see and get the advice of when you do have those board meetings. And I think it's really important that you do some research beforehand. So figuring out who you want to talk to at every firm because they have relevant experience, or they've invested in similar companies in the past, or I don't know, you just really like the way they think about things in their blogging and tweeting or whatever. I think that's super important. And then the other thing I would do is, spend time to get to know them through the process, really figuring out if you think they can be value add to you. And then don't be afraid, once you are going through that process, or once you have a term sheet, really, you can ask for references and call references of people they've invested in, and even do some back channel references for people who they've invested in that haven't worked out.
What kind of value add do VCs provide you? I think like that seems really simple, but it's not something people really talk about that often.
I think they can, well, I think like many do provide no value add, or capital. Capital is a great one. But I think that really good ones can really force you to think about issues that you maybe would choose to ignore if you didn't have someone you had to report to, right? I find that to be helpful, just like having somebody who's going to it's very hard internally in your company to maybe you have co-founders you have a really great relationship with, but oftentimes you don't have anyone who's going to challenge you on your assumptions, and I think it's really helpful to have people around you that will challenge you, right? That's one. I think they'll try to be helpful in all these other ways sometimes, like helping find talent and with upstream capital providers, which may or may not be realized. Those are some of the things. And then brand, actually. I think it's very helpful you're kind of borrowing from the brand of the investor in a lot of ways. And that's for potential customers, potential candidates who would join your company. It's surprising actually how much that matters. Like for Atrium, I actually didn't think it would matter anymore because I started a $1 billion company, come on. And but with Andreessen, once we raised the money for Andreessen, it's actually has there's that brand halo. It's pretty, it's interesting to see.
Yeah, I was gonna say the bar I think is not harmful. If you're not harmful, you're already doing awesomely, which is I guess a pretty cynical perspective. But I think the challenge with the average venture capitalist is they're trying to be helpful, and some of those motions in the direction that seem like they're helpful are actually not, and they're creating a bunch of work for you or your team that can be a distraction from the actual core mission you should be focusing on. So I think there is a danger where even if they're trying to be helpful, it can pivot you in ways that are maybe not appropriate for the business. I think the ways that our investors have been most helpful for us are one is the external accountability. And it's not even that they say something per se, it's just the forcing function of oh, we have a board meeting, so we have to prepare for a board meeting. It's like a paper deadline. You're not gonna write the paper until the night before the deadline. It's okay, fine, we're finally gonna put together the operating plan, or we're finally gonna compute X, Y, Z. So it's a nice forcing function to make you reflect on, I think, the larger strategic stuff. And as Justin mentioned, from a recruiting perspective, we've had our investors get on calls with candidates, that kind of thing.
No need to name names, but what are some of the worst experiences you had with VCs? And can you describe those a little bit?
We had one experience where we were talking to a partner at a VC firm, and this person was like very, very confident they could guess a term sheet. They were like, look, I'm gonna bring you the partner meeting, I'm gonna get you this term sheet, it's gonna be ABC, like you're gonna sign it immediately afterwards, don't worry, this is like all locked in, like let's do it. And we're like, cool, yeah, I like the terms, I like you, I'm excited to work with you, like let's make it happen. So we go to this firm's office, like we present to the partnership, and he's like, okay, I guess I said he, I used they previously. He said, okay, go wait in this little room, like this is gonna take like 15 minutes, we're gonna quickly wrap it up, and then we'll come back with a term sheet and you'll sign it. So we're there, and it's like 15 minutes pass, and like this guy doesn't show up. Like another 15 minutes pass, and this guy doesn't show up, and it's like, now it's like an hour in, and I'm looking at my co-founders, we're like, what is going on? Like, it's clear that even though this person thought they had the ability to get the deal done, that they didn't. And I think they did genuinely believe that they could, they just happened to lack the political capital within the firm. And I think it's easy to underestimate, I think, a lot of these kind of inner firm dynamics where it is political and there is a ranking order. And I think for us, we felt quite burned by that because we were sort of going into it under the assumption that we were in fact going to get this term sheet and have this firm invest in us.
Worst experience, I mean, there's so many to choose from. But some of them, okay, well, I mean, some more serious than others. One lighthearted one, I went to a VC, pitch a VC, very prominent investor, and he, the first like 20 minutes were just, he wanted to talk to me about how he'd like learn to speak Chinese, and he's like not Chinese, and I don't speak Chinese. I'm Chinese ethnically, but I don't really. My Chinese is horrible. But he like insisted on just being like starting to speak Chinese and just like really just like like ni hao, and like I was just like, okay, I'm like kind of playing along, but then it was just like kept going on, and I'm like, why? I'm like, it's just at a certain point it's awkward. Yeah. That was one of, and then at the same firm actually, a different time after that time, they didn't invest. Another time, same firm, this other guy just wanted to talk about how, like we're running Twitch, it's going pretty well, but he just wanted to talk about his experience as a PM at YouTube and how they did this like, I guess I can't go into too much detail, but like they did this project that was like a marketing project and how like impactful it was to YouTube. And I was like, no, YouTube was successful because you get other people to upload the videos, and some of them are viral, and then other people come in. But it's just going on. It's about this marketing project and how it like made YouTube, and I was just like, that was a horrible experience too. They didn't invest again. And this other one where, a recent one, I had a firm that was like, we'll give you a turn. We were negotiating on a verbal offer, and he was like, and this is someone I have a relationship with, and then basically changed his mind over the course of a week, and I didn't really care that much. It wasn't surprising, I guess, but it's not great. But I wasn't like, we're still cool. It's not a problem. But I think if that would have been my only option, then I would feel a lot more annoyed. Other people just like ghosting for it's weird because they don't want to tell you no. Because they, in the future they might want to somehow like ghosting on you is like better than telling you no outright because it preserves the option maybe, even though it's incredibly rude and disheartening to like people who really need your capital or want your capital. But I've had lots of people ghost, and even now that's the part that's weird to me. Lots of people ghosted on me. Those are some of the worst ones. Yeah.
So I've had a lot of founders tell me that they are always fundraising. Fundraising never ends. You're fundraising until you exit or you go public or whatever. Is that true? Or how long does the process take from setting out into the firm to closing the deal?
I think that's a little hyperbolic. I think that at a certain point you need to like actually build your product. Otherwise you are fucked. And so you need to I think many founders who do a good job at fundraising are building relationships during the time that they're actually working on their company. But when you're really fundraising, you're spending like 100% of your time on the process of having meetings, doing pitches, and driving people through a funnel to convert, to get to term sheets, and then close those term sheets. And you can't really be doing anything else. you can't be in this normal operating cadence of your company, because usually when you're operating your company, you're like having regular goal, check-in meetings, you are having one-on-ones. Those things happen at the same time every week or every other week or every month or whatever. And driving up and down like Sand Hill Road, to do 3 pitch meetings in a day is highly disruptive to any sort of operating cadence. So I think what they really mean is they're like always building relationships with investors, which I do think is a good idea, because you are building real relationships with someone, and they're more likely to want to invest if they believe that you're going to be successful, and they're more likely to believe that you're going to be successful if you spend time getting to know someone, kind of subtly convincing them why you're going to be successful, or giving them opportunities to see how you are being successful. So I do think there is something to that.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that, which is my advice is to spend as little time on fundraising as possible, which is anytime you're spending fundraising is time you're not spending growing your business. And success of fundraising is not the same as success with your company, is I think kind of piece one. And then piece two is actually from a deal momentum perspective. You want to just like declare, hey, I'm raising money, and then you want to just get it done. And the longer that you're like raising money and people are talking like, oh, this company's trying to raise money, why haven't they raised money yet? Is there something wrong with them? Like, why haven't the good investors made the investments yet? Like, there's a lot of like, the longer the process takes, time is not on your side when you're raising money. You like want to drive the process to a close very, very quickly, very, very efficiently. But to Justin's point, it is also like a very relationships-based thing. And I think people also don't like this idea of it being totally transactional, of you showing up for the first time and being like, here's my deck, here are the terms you in. Like, they want to know you and they want to spend time with you. And I think in the same way, I would also try to like time box that as well. Like well in advance of you're trying to raise some money, I would try to identify a couple firms, a couple people that I thought I'd potentially want to work with. And I'd want to meet with them and have like a casual coffee, like no deck, just a conversation. Hey, this is who I am, this is what we're up to. So that they like know who you are and you have a face and a name. And so that 6 months later or whenever, when you actually are raising money, they have some context, they know about you, they have the ability to move much more quickly because you've kind of preceded it with some information about yourself.
If you think about it, the reason that they want to get to know you is they think you can make a better decision, but it's also in what they're selling, right? What they sell to LPs, VCs raise money from LPs who are sometimes it's high net worth individuals for smaller funds, but oftentimes it's like big institutions, right? Pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, and then also endowments. And their pitch is that they have a process that is different from everybody else's process, right? Because capital itself is a commodity, right? Like if you get money from General Catalyst or Sequoia or whoever, it all spends the same. It doesn't matter. Your vendors and employees don't really care where their pitch, whose money it is. And so because it's a commodity, it's kind of like that Peter Thiel thing where he's like everything that everyone who's in a commodity business is saying they're a monopoly, and everyone who's in a monopoly business is saying they're a commodity. They're in the commodity business, they're with capital, and so they're saying we have this monopoly on this process, right? We have a specific process that we do that finds the best company, that equals, in the end of the day, the best companies and the best returns. And so usually that process involves like something that they're doing, right? And them getting to know you is like usually oftentimes part of that process. So it's almost like a self-identity thing that they're going to want to get to know you, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So when you have a firm that wants to invest in you, what terms should you be wary of?
I mean, anything that's not market. Most Silicon Valley investors now are not like a lot of the terms definitely for seeds, with safes and then later on with Series A's have converged to like some narrow band of market terms, and your attorneys can help you with that, or advisors, or investors, previous investors, but anything that's not market should be like a red flag, because it means they're also kind of trying to do something else, I guess, other than just like be a normal VC and get money that way. And so, we're always wary of random foreign investors who have these like weird terms and stuff like that.
Yeah, I would echo that, which is also like, it is their job full time to raise money, so they also or to invest money, so they have a much better grasp on the process than you do. So I think the way you combat that or the way you insulate yourself against that is, as Justin mentioned, like leaning on your advisors, your lawyers, your investors, folks in your network to sanity check, like, is this a reasonable term?
If you're really desperate to raise money and you have a firm who wants to, sign a term sheet with poor terms, do you walk away from the deal or do you keep the money? Would you accept money even if the terms of the deal are not to your liking, but you need the capital?
Yeah. Money is life. If you don't have money to operate your company, you are gonna die, right? Like, unless you're profitable, which you should aspire to be probably. But yeah, like, if you have no options, if you have one option, then you should just take that option. I've been in that position a lot, so just take it and make the best of it.
Yeah, I would say within reason, like, if the option is one that totally neuters any of your future upside for you or the team, then like, it's actually not better than just shutting the company down or having it be acqui-hired or whatever. Like, there are some bars in that. But
so if you needed the money, there's nothing that would make you walk away from the deal?
Well, if it's like horrible, like if you're selling yourself into indentured servitude forever, or you have to put up your own, guarantee it with your house or something, maybe you don't want to do that. But for most cases, yeah, you're just gonna take the money and hope you can live with the consequences.
Okay, I think we should take some audience questions and then we can maybe loop back in and do a final few here.
Because we have this low interest rate environment, there's been nothing to invest in, and like lots of people have seen tech companies grow super fast, and so there's been this massive influx of capital by random people, including people who have gotten liquidity from not something else, who are just like, that was easy, let's like do this again by investing in my buddy's startup. And so you've kind of seen that creep up, and then there's been this like streamlining of the investment process by using these convertible securities like safes and convertible notes, which makes it easier for you to raise money incrementally. And so that's just made it super easy and liquid to like get money into the seed round. Sure, you can do anything, right? Like, I think it's possible. Like, I've definitely seen people raise money like $10 million in kind of this convertible note party round, and then like turn it into you could kind of like get money. I think people are always like, in Silicon Valley, people are obsessed with this like kind of path of raising money. There's a seed round, there's a Series A, there's a Series B, there's a Series C. Eventually you get off that path and you're like just trying to find capital from whoever will give it to you at that stage, and or you're profitable, whatever. And so, there's lots of different, paths you can take, but I think there's a lot of other signals that go into like raising Series A from like a good, VC. Like, they can help you in all those ways we kind of talked about. So I think, and there might be like a negative signals from raising money from a bunch of random people, because people in the market might become your employees or future investors might think you couldn't get it from a real investor.
I'm trying to remember the A specifically. Like, we definitely did a lot of diligence for the acquisitions. Here's what happens. You get like a shared Dropbox folder. Dropbox, if you're lucky, some like horrible Merrill Lynch data room if you're unlucky. And then you make a bunch of folders that each have a number and then like a word. It's like 1, employee agreements, 2, like contracts, 3, whatever. They like have a schedule of stuff you have to pull together. And it's like every employment agreement you've ever signed, like executed by the counterparty, like all of the contracts you've ever signed, all of the terms of service you've ever agreed to, and like any software product you've ever used. Like, the list is quite onerous, and one of the things you can do to make your life easier on that stuff is actually being good about collecting it at the time it's created, as opposed to trying to pull it all together after the fact. But so yes, in general, certainly for acquisition, I don't even remember what we did for the A, because my co-founder, thankfully, is like amazing at this stuff. Yes, we had to do a ton of work to just like pull together a bunch of stuff. I don't know if that was your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we're trying to solve this problem at Atrium. One of the things you can do on the diligence side, so there's like legal diligence and business diligence, right, that your investors are going to do. For our first price round, we raised like $10.5 million from General Catalyst, and we didn't have a business at the time. It was just a narrative, so there was no business diligence really. But the legal diligence process, I mean, it took about 5 weeks, I think, to close around anyways, because we had to like incorporate the company and stuff like that. On the more recent round, we closed it pretty quickly, actually, and a couple things that we did to make that happen is like we compiled all our business diligence up front, and we had it in a folder, and we just would share that folder with everyone who was kind of like, at a certain stage in the fundraising process after like the second meeting. And then the other thing we did was we, anyone can do is like you can compile all this like legal diligence beforehand, before you get a term sheet, so it's ready to go. And lots of times people actually don't do that, and that like delays their process. Your lawyers aren't gonna like actually look at your documents before you have a signed term sheet in hand because they don't think they're gonna get paid until you actually raise money. At Atrium, we encourage you to just like do all the diligence stuff up front so that it will streamline your process post signing a term sheet, because it's a faster process. So regardless of the case, what you decide to do, I think you should do that diligence up front if you want it to go quickly. Lots of times founders are like, they're not worried about the diligence part, they're worried about getting a term sheet, understandably, so they don't do any of the pre-work. Well, I don't think we did a good job, which is why it was like begging the entire time, even though they had like tens of millions of MAU, and like, millions of monthly, or like probably tens of millions of monthly hours of video watched. If I was to do it again today, I would definitely, you want to show that it's a cultural phenomenon that's happening, right? The hard part for Twitch specifically was that the product was never used by any investor, right? Investors are like 45-year-old like guys, right? And with kids and stuff. And the product was used by 13 to maybe, mid-20s at the time, year-old people. And so they didn't get it. They didn't get why anyone would want to do this. In fact, oftentimes people were just like, I don't believe it, right? You saying these metrics, but I don't believe the numbers. So I think we really should have focused a lot more on like, this is a phenomenon that's happening, like, and really going deeper into explaining what Twitch fulfills for those users, right? Like I think actually Twitch we spend a lot of time talking about esports, but I actually think Twitch itself is a lot more like talk radio, where people are just leaving it on the background while they're doing other stuff. I think we should have spent more time really focusing on that narrative and explaining what the phenomenon was. And then here's the evidence that we've cracked something that's riding this big wave, which is our numbers and metrics.
Look, in general, there are two types of companies that exist in the world, like new market companies that are building a thing that doesn't currently exist. And this is kind of like the example you were giving, Marwa. And there are like very solid existing market companies. And for us, the narrative on bookkeeping is that it is the most existing market business possible, basically. Like, in the history of the world, of all civilization, like some of the oldest known written artifacts are literally receipts. Like as soon as there was commerce, there was like people tracking how many cows they had or whatever. So for us, it was like, look, this market is enormous. Every business has this problem. They're basically legally required to solve it. Like the narrative really focused on how big is the market, and answer, it's always huge. Like you need to make it super huge. And then like, well, how big of a pain point is it on the like nice to have, need to have spectrum? Like you want to be as far towards need to have as you can possibly be. And I think once you check those boxes, it's like, fine, why will our thing be better? And for us, I think in the early days, the narrative on why our thing will be better was sort of twofold. One is that like, even though we are a software company, what we're actually providing is the service of doing your books. And so the competition is not another software company, it's someone clicking around totally by hand in QuickBooks. So we're like, well, what is the alternative? The alternative is the absence of technology. We know how to make technology, like that's why it will be better. And the second component of it as well was, well, look at the team we've assembled. It's just like an amazing team on the engineering, product, design side, like that the team, you would believe that the team was capable of building the thing that was 10x better than what previously existed. Yeah, that's a tough one, which is like, how do you get in front of the top firms? How do you get in front of firms, period? And I think the thing that I have consistently heard from our investors is that the thing they value the most is, kind of unfortunately, is warm intros from other founders. And that's way more powerful than anything else, even intros from your existing investors, like, or intros from other people in the ecosystem. So I think step one is like, getting connected with other founders, ideally founders that are current portfolio companies of those firms.
That's a long question. Yeah, I think it's a bunch of things. Definitely like, well, when I started off, probably the same for you. I like didn't know anything. I was bad at everything, actually. Even the core skills, like I was a bad programmer, definitely a bad manager, bad at fundraising. Really the only thing we had going for us was we would do this like crazy thing and stick with it. And so now, I'm like not terrible at many things actually, and good at a few things like telling a narrative and really selling, any sort of selling type of thing, recruiting, kind of selling to journalists or investors or clients. So I think that's, that kind of is a core skills thing. And then I just think the exposure through multiple companies, you see the patterns of like what works, what, in terms of attack vectors into a market, what doesn't work, common mistakes that you can avoid the second or third time. Some of that stuff. And I think the last thing I'd say is like, there's more purpose for me. It's more intentional. Like when I started the first company and even some of the other companies, it was like just something to do, something to do because it seemed like I could, kind of work on something I found interesting or whatever. But now I think it's a lot more goals based around what's going to facilitate my own personal growth and learning. And I've decided that a company is the best way to do that. And so there's a little bit more like intentionality around it.
Surprisingly similar answer. I think the biggest thing for me is just having the two other data points to look at has really helped us like internally prioritize. And let me give you an example. So in the first company, we were all like 22 or whatever. And similarly, we lived in like a crappy apartment in Cambridge where we also worked. Like the first floor was like the living room and the first floor bedroom, and they had joined onto each other and we're like, this is the office. And then me and my co-founders lived on floors 2 and 3, and my room was the biggest room. So it was declared that it was also the conference room. So the layout of my room was literally my bed, a table, a Polycom speakerphone, like a ring of chairs, a couch, and then like my clothes. So we just did not know anything about anything. And because of that, everything seemed like an emergency. Every single thing all the time felt like it was going to kill the company. And so every single day we're like, oh my God, this is going to kill the company. Like this bad code someone checked in is going to kill the company. Like we need to fix it right now. Like we need better code review. Oh no, this person emailed like the Linux kernel mailing list with an idea that sounded kind of like ours. That's going to be the end of this company. Like we really need to like work harder. It just like everything was constantly in like emergency mode. And like one, that's not a healthy way to live. Like it's very stressful. And 2 is like, it's just not productive. And so I think for us in the second company, we were much more disciplined about, and as it turns out, literally 0% of those company killers had any impact on the trajectory of the company. Like the things that actually mattered were not in that list and were actually like mostly serendipity. So in the second company, we were like, okay, here are the things we need to do. There's a given day we haven't completed task 5. Is task 5 urgent? Do we need to do it tonight? If so, like, yeah, let's stay here till it's done. If we don't, like, I would rather me and our employees and our co-founders like spend time with their partners or friends or like having dinner or like reading a book or whatever. So I think like it's very trite to talk about it, but I think we are a bit better about work-life balance and that has paid dividends. And like, I'm not amazing at that still, but I'm definitely much better at it than I think we used to be.
Well, I mean, it sounds like for both of us, it was like you can't raise any more money. So, and the relative option of what someone is in the corporate world is willing to pay for your company is much higher than what you can get, or more attractive, I guess, than what you can get from investors. I actually think that big companies, like the FANG companies, are much, much better than investors, like at understanding what has value in general, on average, I should say. That's not like, on average. And so, yeah, for us, it was just like, at the same time that we, got the $970 million offer, we couldn't raise money at a $600 million valuation for Twitch. So it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think for us, it was a calculus. Like, again, that was the sort of narrative where like there was an investor who was willing to invest less money on terms we were not as excited about. So we had that kind of in one hand. And then we had the acquisition offer in the other. And I think there was like 2 or 3 main axes that we tried to evaluate this on. One is like financially. It's like, okay, X dollars now or X dollars as per the terms of the deal versus like, what do we think the risk reward trajectory of continuing to operate this business is? Number two I think actually matters more, is like, is this going to be a good home for the team? Both like for us, the founders, but also like the employees who've entrusted us to like take good care of them. And for us, like when we were thinking about coming to Dropbox, it was like, well, okay, it checked the box on like the financials of the deal. And then we just thought it would like be an awesome place for our team, that like they would grow and thrive there and that we would like get to do exciting stuff there. And I think number two is underrated. In other words, I think when people talk about evaluating acquisition offers, they're like, well, who has the biggest number? I actually think that matters less than like how much you're gonna enjoy being there. Because if nothing else, like you personally are gonna be subject to some amount of vesting when your company gets acquired, and the actual dollars that leave with you in your pocket are a function of how long you stay there. And there are companies that you'll really enjoy spending time at and you'll stay there longer, and there are companies that you will less enjoy spending time at and you will not stay there as long. And so that actually has a very material impact on the financial outcome for you that I think people don't think that thoughtfully about.
Well, things are going to change, but I would just make your plan that you want to execute, right? Like the plan of like, what are the milestones that we think we need to be convinced that, you know, this business can take more money and that we can accelerate it for the next round, right? Like, so I don't know, maybe that's like based on another company, if you understand like what their metrics look like. You know, if you're like building a, I don't know, direct-to-consumer CPG company or something, you kind of understand what the market looks like for what kinds of proof points you need to deliver to like get to the next, to raise the next round. That could be okay, I guess, but I would be doing it for yourself, I guess, more than anyone else.
It's a good question. I'm to be totally honest with you, which is I don't totally remember. I think like our feeling was, having looked at I think what other companies were raising at the time and sort of like where we felt we were in the like spectrum of other companies, that like this felt like a healthy amount of money to raise, which I think is actually not the right way to evaluate it. I think the way you want to do it is actually to back solve it from subsequent fundraising, which is, okay, to raise the next round, this is where I'm going to need to be. This is how long it's going to take me. This is how I have to staff up to do it. What does that imply about how much capital I need to raise now? And we sort of had a narrative around that. I don't think our numbers were wrong, actually. I think the problem or the resistance that we got from investors was that they didn't feel that our traction to date justified an investment of that size. And so they were much more like, well, why don't you take a smaller amount of money, prove it out a little bit more, and then come back to us in a year, and then yes, if it actually unfolds like you're telling us it will, we'll write that check that you want then. We just want to like turn some more cards over. It's one of these things where it's like mixing business and pleasure like has benefits and has downsides. Like there is a guy that was not an investor in our company that wanted to be an investor in our company, and actually now that has led to a lot of friction between this person and one of my co-founders. And so that was, I think, a relationship that used to be friendly that because of a perceived snub or slight on both parties, like is now not a friendly relationship. And like, that kind of sucks. Yeah.
I guess for myself, I just, when it comes to your company, you know, that's no one's owed, you know, the ability to invest. Yeah, so, I mean, I had friends who wanted to invest and, you know, it was the wrong timing or whatever, tried to accommodate, but, you know, they're okay with it or not. But it's not like, I'll always put my company first. You mean like the biggest line item in your P&L that's like gonna cause burn? It's like probably your head count if you're here in San Francisco. So you control that. Lots of people don't control it very well. But that's what I'd be thinking about. You know, your plan is probably mostly based around like how many people you're hiring. I would separate them from like the signal of that happening from what you should do about it, right? The signal of people, you just working on your company, you're growing so fast and you don't give a shit about raising money from VCs and they're like begging you to take meetings, that's good. That's great. That's the position that everybody in this room wants to be in, including me and Waseem. What you should do about it though is like, I think there's a temptation from founders, which I think is wrong, to just go with whatever's easy because someone's like coming in and saying, I'll take my money. to just say, oh, okay, I'm just going to do that because I hate fundraising. I don't want to talk to a lot of investors, so I'm just going to take what's easy. But I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't run make it into a process. It doesn't have to be a process that involves talking to everyone in Silicon Valley, but actually structuring it as like, I'm going to decide to raise money because I can grow my business faster, or because of some, I want it for my business. Okay, make that decision. And then how am I going to do this? Okay, maybe I'm going to seed this funnel with all the people who have reached out to me, and maybe some other maybe other people who I want to think can be value add to the business, and then just like run it like a normal process. Because I think taking that easy money from whoever's there is, it's like recruiting, right? If you're going to recruit someone to be on your team, you might just put a JD out and just wait for someone to come in the door, but what's the odds that that's like the perfect fit candidate? I don't know. It could be, but you might want to like put more people in the funnel so you get a feeling of like who's available out there.
I'm like an old person in the sense that like my friend was very into Bitcoin circa 2010 in this crappy apartment in Cambridge that I was talking about, and he like set up a Bitcoin miner and like mined a block of 50 Bitcoins or whatever, and I was like, this is stupid. And it's not a very widely held opinion, but when it comes to like ICOs in Bitcoin and crypto, I'm just like, I'm not interested in hearing about it. Not to disparage it, I think there's all kinds of interesting stuff that's happening. For me personally, I don't have any thoughts on it. Yeah, it's not my thing.
I think for last year, lots of people wanted to participate in the market because they saw it as an easy way to get capital. Lots of like random companies that couldn't raise money from traditional capital sources did it successfully. Now I think that's like kind of cooled off a lot. So yeah, I don't know. Probably not a good option right now.
Sure. To the first point about like, okay, you have a bunch of associates reaching out. I mean, ideally, you are spending your time with the people that can actually make the decisions, and the associates are in general not the people that can make the decisions. And I think there are two pieces that go on here. One is, I think the point of contact at the firm ends up being like the person that you first talk to, like they kind of like imprint on you, and it's like, now that's your person at the firm. So as much as possible, I think you want to make that as high level a person as possible. In general, my feeling on these coffee conversations is, again, I think you want to sort of run it in a very process-oriented way, even if the step of the process you're in is like, I'm in get-to-know-you mode, I'm not raising money. Because I think you could spend literally 100% of the hours in your day just meeting with people that want to get coffee with you to talk about your company, because that's their job. Their job is to meet with as many companies as possible to understand which companies are good and which companies are bad. So just because they're getting coffee with you doesn't mean that they're actually necessarily potentially interested. The same is true of M&A. Like someone reaches out from corp dev at Google and you're like, oh my God, my company's gonna get acquired. It's like, no, that person's job is to meet every single company in Silicon Valley and evaluate whether someday Google may or may not want to buy it. So I think my advice in general is like, kind of as Justin mentioned, just to be thoughtful about, okay, these are the firms or these are people I'd like to talk to. How do I constrain the time required in that process? For our first company, we had some technology for Linux where we could take a Linux kernel update and apply it on the system without rebooting. So that pop-up you get, it's like, you must reboot to install new updates. We had some technology to take those updates, transform them, and then you could apply them on the system like literally while I was running with no downtime. And like step one in this process was that all the other like Linux nerds were like, this is not technically possible. There's no way you'll be able to do it. And then like, okay, we did it. And then we like showed them that we did it. And they're like, fine, I guess you can do it, but it's like not that stable. And then we had to convince that like, yes, no, you can use it on a production system, that it is very stable. And then we're like, okay, fine, now we convinced that. Now we need to like find the person who might like want to buy it and use it on their systems. And then we like went and talked to a bunch of people to find someone who like might want to buy it to use on their systems. And then we had to figure out how much they would pay for it because it was like not a capability that previously existed. And so we had to do all this work around figuring out like how much they would pay us for it. And then we had to figure out like who the decision maker was. There was a whole bunch of work associated with the fact that this was basically computer science research. And we did it without like the end state really in mind. We're like, we made this cool thing, how do we do a company with it? Whereas I think, perhaps because I think it's easier, for us, we're like, look, here's a very visceral, painful problem where people's hair is on fire. We think we can solve it. I mean, maybe this is just like my own laziness, but the shape of the problem is just like much, much more compelling, where it's like there's a huge thing, everyone has it, we know what they'll pay for it, we know that they need it, like we just need to do it. As opposed to the first company where it was this uphill battle every single day convincing you that like you should run it on your systems.
I think the angels are good. You know, having those founders who can hopefully give you some feedback about your business, but then also maybe they can provide you interest to their investors downstream is good. I think at the Series A stage, they don't care where you got the money for the seed round from, because they look down on all the investors that invest in the seed rounds. So it could be your mom or your grandma or your friends or loans or like government grants, whatever. They're just evaluating like, is this a good business? Do I want to spend time on this business? Do I like these founders? Do I think they're going to be successful? You know, how you got there, everyone has like a horrible story that involves probably begging, to get there. VCs don't care.
I tend to agree. I think the other thing that we found was true. Like we had pretty big seed rounds in both company 2 and this company. Is like most of your angels are going to do nothing for you. 10% like will be extremely helpful, but you don't know which 10% a priori. So like my view is sort of like if you like and trust and want the people involved, like I think that's the prerequisite. But if those pass the test and like you do want to raise that amount of capital, I kind of think it's better to let more people in than fewer people because you don't know who's going to be super helpful. So for us in our second company, there was this guy who like, we had kind of already raised the round. I did not particularly want to let him in, but like he came to us sort of last minute. He's like, look, I'm really interested in this company. I really want to invest. And we like had some heartburn about it. We're like, fine, like we'll let you invest. And that guy was like the best guy. That guy was like super helpful. Like he is an investor in the third, he's just best guy. I'm super glad that we let him invest, and we would not have predicted that at the time we were raising the seed round.
Yeah, it's probably different for our companies than it is for the average company, right? Because we were selling to companies, especially lots of startups. And so, which is why we're doing here, so sitting off stage, doing this event. For us, my strategy for the seed round was to raise money from, General Catalyst led it, but we also included like 90 other investors, including, Thrive, Founders Fund, SV Angel, First Round Capital, Greylock, NEA, and the list goes on, under the theory that they would be channel partners for us. Well, maybe not partners, but they would be a channel for us to sell into. And so, it has been a helpful strategy.
Yeah, same. We used to do this thing too with our investor updates where there was literally a leaderboard of like, here's how many customers investor X referred this month. And so it like did cause a little bit of like, oh, I need to refer more to beat that guy. So yes, I mean, that was definitely part of the strategy. And I think for us, especially in the early days, it was quite productive. Now less so, like it just doesn't move the needle as much, but definitely in the early days, that was one of the things that led to the calculus.
All right, last one.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know who you are, so it's not going to be that warm.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. All right, yeah, let's give a round of applause to our panelists.